Well, hello. This is Hiring for Good podcast. I am Tanis Morris, and with me is my lovely host, Suzanne Hannafin. We are with Acumen Executive Search, and we have this podcast to discuss leadership, lessons learned, and how the teams that we build at work can influence not only the companies that we work with, but the world at large. And today we have a lovely guest. Krishna Walker is here with us. Krishna, I'm going to refer to my notes. So Krishna is an experienced corporate executive, well-versed in strategic leadership, operations and executive management, and general management. She's currently Chief Legal and Corporate Affairs Officer at CareVet, and she credits her corporate success to her strong background in banking and financial services, M&A and corporate finance, agriculture, and private equity. And I'm sure she'll be discussing some of these things as we talk about her journey. Krishna believes in building teams distinguished by integrity and accountability, and she's also an active community leader serving on both national and local nonprofit boards. Krishna, thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks.
So our first question is always to just kind of have you tell us a little bit about your journey. And you can go back as far as you want. I think we were chatting a little before we got started. This is a conversation between friends, and we're glad that you're here, and we want a friendly conversation with you, kind of telling us all about your life.
Awesome. So I would start with, I was born in South Bend, Indiana. Mm-hmm. That's where I've probably lived more years collectively than anywhere else I've ever lived. Born and raised there, stayed in state for college, and then moved to New York City for graduate school. Lived there for 6 years and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. I was working for Bank of America at the time in HR. Moved to Charlotte 1 month before my now 21-year-old daughter was born.
Oh, wow.
And transferred there to corporate headquarters. And that was a time that I really had to reevaluate everything. What am I doing? What do I want to do going forward? And I was fortunate to work at Bank of America for 5 years and to see several different parts of the bank. I knew I loved transactions from talking to my internal clients. And so I spent the couple of years that I lived in Charlotte figuring out how can I become part of transactions without having to do spreadsheets. And the answer to that is to become a lawyer.
Okay.
So I applied to law school, went back to my hometown of South Bend for law school at Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And after that, went to work for a large law firm in St. Louis, Missouri. And I was there for 8 years. That experience was amazing because my practice centered on commercial finance transactions, mm-hmm. primarily on the debt side. But I also got to be outside general counsel for a few pretty large nonprofit clients, which gave me a breadth of experience. So I had depth in sort of the debt transaction side, but also a breadth of experience. And so from there, went actually into an operations role for a bank, commercial lending operations, and then back into legal. So that brings me to today, where I went to work for CareVet in 2020, thick of the pandemic.
Wow.
And I was brought in there to really help bring in-house the M&A activity that had been going on. At that time, there were 26. So CareVet is a portfolio company of the Compass Group Equity Partners. And we acquire and operate veterinary hospitals throughout the U.S. So when I joined in June of 2020, we had 26 hospitals. And as of last week, we have 200 we've acquired.
Oh, my goodness. And I didn't realize that you've done all of that in 4 years.
In 4 years.
Yeah.
In 4 years, and primarily all in-house.
Wow.
So the fun of that was I was able to blend the lending operations experience I had inside the bank, Rabobank, with my legal experience and build a platform where we could really do transactions internally pretty seamlessly. It's heavily dependent on technology and with bringing in the best legal team in the world. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it was interesting hearing about your background and this formative period of your life. And I think as women and as moms, we've all faced that. What other experiences that you can talk about to where you've had to pause and really make conscientious decisions on, what's next? What does this look like? And how did you learn from them?
That's an interesting question. One thing that I've had a practice of doing for a very long time is at various points in my life, usually it's January or my birthday month, which is July, yay.
Happy birthday!
I try to pause and just take a look at what have I been doing? Is it what I want to still do? Mm-hmm. What do I want next in my life? And so I try to build that in so it's routine, so that as opportunities come up, it's pretty easy to weed out whether it's a good opportunity or not. Mm-hmm. So I guess to answer your question, that's something that is kind of an ongoing thing. And probably maybe 5 years ago, I started doing that with my husband. Mm-hmm. Which is why I'm here in Oregon, to be honest, because we'd kind of listed out all the things we wanted in our career. What did we want from a professional development standpoint, job, et cetera. And my husband got a call from a headhunter. And as he went through the process, we were like talking about it. I'm like, see this list? I'm like, this is like, it's hitting every single thing that you wanted on your list. So we moved from St. Louis to Oregon for my husband's job. And I'm thankful that I've been able to work remotely. I go back to St. Louis every 4 to 6 weeks. But I try to be really thoughtful about, take inventory about what I like and don't like with whatever it is I'm doing currently and what I want to see going forward, just so that I can be ready when the time comes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it leads beautifully into our next question, because I think doing that kind of assessment probably helps you really solidify what your personally held values are. Mm-hmm. As a leader at your organization, how do you transfer those personally held values? And if you don't mind sharing them, we'd be interested. But how do you kind of instill those into the workplace?
So that's great. So it is important to me, no matter where I work, I have to feel like I am contributing to society, and my workplace also feels like they're contributing to society. It allows you to create or to attract a team that has those same values, and it all builds on itself. So I would use as an example at CareVet, one of the reasons why I left a really great job that I loved to come to CareVet is because the premise that our founders had when starting CareVet was that veterinarians could have a better quality of life if we just tweaked a few things that were standard in the industry. So, for example, the average salary of a veterinarian has probably increased from, below 6 figures to above, above the 6-figure mark now. And we were leaders in that. Also, making sure that there's a living wage at the veterinary hospital was something that when we implemented it was not being widely done. So being able to do those things that make the quality of life better for people is something that resonates with me and is an important value. The work has to be fun and challenging, but there also has to be something more than just having challenging work.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when you talk about building teams and building out teams, taking those core values, what's your methodology or thought process, and how do you manage teams? Because you're remote.
Yes. So we have a pretty regular meeting cadence as a team. I'm not a big one-on-one person. Some people are really into that. For me, my preference is talk to people as needed, when needed, give feedback in real time so that you're not kind of saving it all up. For me, it builds up angst. So I don't want to do that to anyone else. But so I try to do a lot of real-time conversations as needed. And then as a group, we meet once a week and we try to share. I try to create an environment where we all feel comfortable sharing personal stuff as well as work stuff, that we're brainstorming if we have problems, what can we do to help each other kind of work through those problems, that sort of thing. So that's how I try to keep us together as a team. It is about time for me to set up our annual offsite. So I've tried to do an offsite every year as well, especially with me being not there, for us to just have some time away from work, where we're spending, half a day or a day. Some of it's continuing legal education, some of it is fun, and some of it is just like, again, talking through what can we do to make our department even stronger.
And is most of your team then all remote from each other, or
No,
are you just remote?
I'm just remote.
Okay.
So it's interesting. CareVet's headquarters team is in person, has been the entire time, like through the pandemic and everything, which is important, especially those early years when we were growing and like small and growing, because people are constantly bouncing ideas off of each other, and there's an energy at the headquarters office that I truly miss. It's a lot of fun. We've got really talented and bright people, and so the preference for headquarters team is to be in person in St. Louis for that reason. We do have a number of people who are not. Those are primarily our business development team members and our operations team members, because they need to be closer to where our veterinary hospitals are. But having that nucleus all together is helpful. So.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go off script a little bit and talk about being a portfolio company has both positives and negatives. What's been your experience? And you know, again, you've done large corporations, law firms, you know, I mean, like what do you think of that structure, and how does it work at CareVet?
I really enjoy it. Our sponsor has a model that really tries to leave a lot of autonomy with the portfolio companies, which is great. And especially the pace at which we're doing acquisitions. I think the typical model is the sponsor would kind of run all of that. But because of our sponsor's philosophy and our founder's philosophy of like, we want to be personable. Part of why legal was brought in house is because you don't want like someone's first, their first impression of the company is like someone who doesn't even work for the company. And when you're negotiating a deal and you're also going to have to work with the folks after the deal is closed, it's just a little bit different. And so we have a great working relationship with our sponsor. They're supportive. And then they also are hands off when they need to be, just so that we can keep things going for the sake of efficiency. And we have a board of managers, sort of like a board of directors, that is 7 people. And so you get a little bit of that good corporate governance that I think there are more private equity sponsors that move toward that model for their portfolio companies. But so it's an interesting experience. I like it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm really intrigued because 200 acquisitions. That's 200 individual cultures that you're trying to assimilate into a large unit. And it sounds like you're letting them have a lot of leeway, but are there overarching commonalities that you strive for, or does it matter?
Yes. No, that's a great question. So that is where our sort of selection process comes into play. That's also something that's really unique that I enjoy. Our investment committee is larger than probably most companies' investment committees are, with the idea that because we are having our new hospitals come in and kind of keep their culture, we need to make sure we know what that culture is. Does it align with the values that we have as a company? The way they operate, does it align with the way we'd like to operate? And so you're hearing voices from legal, from operations, from recruiting. Like, you've got a number of different voices that weigh in on our investment committee. And it allows us to have those guardrails so that if there's something that is not going to be a fit, someone's going to speak up in that investment committee. And it's not, there's a range of seniority as well. So it's not like the people who may never have to touch the hospital who are weighing in. It's the people who are going to be boots on the ground and working with our hospitals that are weighing in on how it would fit with the other hospitals that are near in proximity, et cetera.
And so what happens if you find out maybe a year into the, acquisition that something wasn't a good fit? Because I think we learn from those challenges as much as, everything's groovy and yeah.
Yep. No, I think that's right. So it's for like a almost 6-year-old company. And so we've constantly learned. And so every single part of our processes, everything that we look at in investment committee, what we talk about in investment committee today is much different than what we were talking about in 2020 because we've learned a lot more. But our philosophy is really, we have conversations with people. It's written into our legal documents. Like if there's a dispute, first we're going to talk about it. Like, we're not going to jump to like, I'm calling my lawyer, et cetera. So, if there is an issue and it comes to legal and we're like, okay, so have you talked to them about it yet? And so at times where there seems like there might not be a good fit, there is a lot of time and energy spent on like, how do we make this relationship work? Because we've agreed we're going to be in a relationship. So how do we get this to work out so that it is smooth and fruitful for everyone?
Yeah, and I bring it up because, my background in M&A, it was easy on the finance side to run the numbers and make a logical decision. The hard work was the integration. And there was times where it failed miserably, and then there was times it was like, wow, what a great alignment. Yes.
So it's interesting. Our integrations process is also very different from what I'm accustomed to. So when we sign, it's a sign and close. It's not sign and then close.
Oh.
So our integration process starts actually before the deal even closes, which gives an opportunity to figure out if there's something wonky on either side, that there's an opportunity to unwind it before it becomes a done deal. And so for the businesses we're acquiring, they're primarily small businesses. They've never, for a lot of folks, never been part of a big corporation. And so there's a very prescribed process, again, that is developed over the years. Every week, there are specific things that we talk about. This is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen on the acquisition side, and this is what's going to happen after we close. So we've gotten really, really good at that. And then there's also a period after closing to kind of help ease that transition so that we get less and less of those things where there's friction after the fact, because people know what to expect once they've come on board.
Well, in going from 26 to 200, I mean, talk about growth. How have you been able to balance and manage that growth? I mean, we mentioned earlier, you're a mom, you're a wife, you're a leader, you're so many things. And how have you been balancing that?
So part of that is making sure that my team and the teams that we interact with have what they need to be successful. So one of the values that I didn't talk about that's really important to me is professional development for myself and for my teams. And so I try my very best to know what every single person on my team wants out of their career and try to build in opportunities for them to get that experience at CareVet. One, because they'll be passionate about it and they'll jump in and really make a go of it. But also because then it gives them something that they can talk about later when it's time, whether it's at CareVet or somewhere else, to jump into a bigger role. We have that same sort of mentality as we're dealing with our internal clients, which is, okay, I see, like, I'm working with, we'll call it XYZ department, and they keep running into this issue over and over again. What can we do to make it so that they're not frustrated and they're not having to come back to us with a problem? So we have a lot of opportunity to build proactively within the company, which is great. So that just because something has been a problem in the past, there's a pretty low barrier most of the time to fixing it.
Gosh, I feel like every answer that you have, it makes me think of so many other questions. It's just, I mean, one thing I wanted to remark on is I think it's really interesting. Most of the time when you're talking about a portfolio company, I think there's a sentiment out there that it's like only all about the numbers. And this sounds so like beautiful and refreshing and like supportive.
It's also about the numbers. Yeah. So underlying all of this is like, you can't do any of the other stuff. You can't grow. You can't continue to acquire unless you have the numbers to get that financial support you need to keep acquiring. And so, yes, we are all presented with the numbers and what we need to work on to make sure that we're at some point able to have a successful exit. Because as a portfolio company, you know, at some point that is going to be, that's what we're going to do. And so and that's a fun challenge for me because it's like, how do I make this the prettiest package with the nicest gift inside for whoever is going to eventually acquire this company? And so, yes, so we all are expected to, and we all do focus on we're doing this great stuff, and how does that make financial sense for us today and also for a future acquirer?
It's kind of cool though that you're integrating the companies you're identifying don't just align financially with your objectives, but they also have to match up culturally, which is, a huge part of success in having a successful organization. And I think it's so dependent on leadership. So, as a leader, if you were to go back to that young woman, before law school or, or like after college, or maybe, just as you completed your master's, what advice would you give to your younger self?
So that's an interesting question. I am very, very fortunate that I've had amazing mentors throughout my life. Going back to when I was at Ball State University undergrad, I was appointed to the board of trustees for the university, 9-member board, 1 student. And the president was a very good mentor and talked to me about what it means to be a leader, especially at that level. So I'm like 19 or 20 years old and on the governing board of the university. And so thankfully, I had some good voices to my younger self when I was young. But and it was President Worthen, what he imparted to me was just the importance of being diligent, making sure you know the information that's in front of you, and keeping in mind you might still feel like you're the same you, but people view you differently. And just being aware of how the things that I say and do can have a different perception just because of my position as a leader. And so that's something that I've thankfully have been able to build into my life over the years that is important. And it's frankly, it's something that I've had to relearn now that I'm like in the back half of my career. As my peers have gotten younger, as I've gotten older. And I have to remember sometimes like, okay, we're peers, and at the same time, there's an age difference there. And so things that, and which means a generational difference sometimes too. So things as a Gen Xer that are normal might not ruffle my feathers. For not this case for all generations. I'll just say it like that. Yeah. So I've had to kind of tweak my my way of thinking about things and my way of operating a little bit with that in mind.
Yeah. And so when you're looking forward, what does the next 5 years look like, whether it's at CareVet, you personally? What is the next chapter?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's one I think about a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm having fun where I am and would like to continue to write that out as long as I can and sort of continue to grow within my current role. I see myself, I like the governance piece of things and continuing to expand into more governance-related things, advising for private equity firms, et cetera. And who knows what my next, I think I've got at least one more full-time role in me before I retire. And so would love to continue to stay in the C-suite, whether it's in legal or another role. But those are the things that I'm thinking about.
Absolutely. And then the last question, podcast, hiring for good. Mm-hmm. What does hiring for good mean to you?
It means hiring for what makes sense for your context at that time and for where you see things going. So depending on where I've been in different companies, et cetera, I've looked for slightly different things. One thing that's constant, though, is you want someone that is going to be serious about their work, but not take themselves seriously. So being able to enjoy the work, be passionate about it, have fun with it, and that kind of feeds in them to doing high quality work. That's like a constant that I always look for, regardless of sort of skill or other things that I might look for from place to place. I'll give an example. So for when I worked at Rabobank, it's an agricultural bank. For me, someone with an ag experience was a huge plus because the group that I managed was customer facing. And so I did not have an ag background before I started at Rabo. And so having a team that had that experience was really important to make sure, number one, they were teaching me a little bit, but also as the team was interacting with customers, that they could have that commonality and build those bonds. At CareVet, people that have had prior veterinary experience is really important. But those are sort of the things that I look for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then on the leadership side, again, looking back in your career, what advice would you give to your successor?
Yes. I would say we did our very best, but there's room for improvement always, right?
Always.
So that's like when I took the job, I was like, oh, I get to build this department from scratch, and then someone else can complain about like all the stuff that I missed later.
Yeah.
So I would say there are some things that are really foundationally strong, and there's always room for improvement. And so look for those opportunities to strengthen what's already there. Hopefully there's not a whole lot that would need to be scrapped and redone, but just really look for those areas for improvement.
And it's so interesting, Krishna, listening. Humility comes to my mind. You're a phenomenal leader.
Thanks.
So, and thank you so much for being part of this podcast. And
it was such a pleasure. Yeah, we're thrilled. We're very excited.
Yeah, it's interesting. We probably have interviewed 12, 15, maybe more. Yeah. And it's amazing how you can tell a great leader because they do come like who they are. There's no ego, that humility, and then how that is transcended throughout the organization. And it sounds like you're in a great space and growing and doing it all.
Yes. Yeah, I am. It's hard for me to be anybody else other than who I am. Yeah. So I've always tried to be really transparent when I'm interviewing on things I like, don't like, et cetera. And vibe is important to me. So I thrive when I feel like I'm not being judged for being the person who I am.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. I think our audience is going to really enjoy this conversation, and I know we did.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today at Hiring for Good. If you were inspired by our conversation, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And if you want to learn more about our executive search services, check us out at www.hiringforgood.net or our company website, Acumen Executive Search.
Thanks so much, and don't forget to join us next time for another in-depth conversation about transformational leadership. Until then, have fun.